Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on the EU Hydrogen Bank. Will it be a game changer for renewable hydrogen in Europe? This is the main question we will seek to answer today. This webinar is organized by the Renewable Hydrogen Coalition, and my name is Anna Mamatova, EU Policy Manager at the Coalition, and I will be your moderator today. For those of you who don't know the Coalition, we bring the front runners across the entire value chain to policymakers, and will promote the critical role of renewable hydrogen to deliver EU decarbonization goals. So in September 2022, Ursula von der Leyen gave her State of the Union speech, and she said, "We have to move from the niche market to the mass market for hydrogen," as she was announcing what will be the first glimpse of the EU Hydrogen Bank. Big amount of projects have been announced since. However, the cost of renewable hydrogen has been a key challenge for its uptake in hard-to-electrify sectors. As a solution to this challenge, the European Commission presented the EU Hydrogen Bank. However, many questions arise. How will it help making renewable hydrogen bankable? What role should it take in the EU's response to the United States Inflation Reduction Act? How should it help Europe stay leader in one of the key clean technologies of the 21st century? To answer those questions and many more, we are fortunate to have with us today distinguished experts from industry, NGOs, and EU institutions. Let me start by introducing them to you. We have Johanna Schiel, Policy Officer at DG Klima, European Commission. On the industry side, we have Leon de Graaf, Acting Head of Brussels Representation, First Ammonia, and Rasmus Matthiesen, Senior Regulatory Advisor on Ørsted. Finally, on the NGO side, Gert de Kok, Manager for Electricity and Energy in Transport and Environment. So this webinar is live on Twitter, and I would encourage you, the audience, to ask questions for our panelists directly on Twitter, indicating to whom the question should go. So let's get started, shall we? Johanna, let me start with you. So why the European Commission is establishing this EU Hydrogen Bank? What is the timeline there?
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much also for the invite. It's a pleasure to be here with you, also with everyone on Twitter and live. You already gave a bit of an introduction, so maybe I add on the context and then I get into the details. So the European Hydrogen Bank was first announced by President von der Leyen in her State of the Union speech last September. And we then had further announcements with the Green Deal Industrial Plan in February, and we will likely hear more about the bank soon. So first of all, the title is a little bit Magrittian. The bank is not a bank. And I would like to make that very clear because we don't want to raise wrong expectations. This is not about creating a new financial institution. It's really about, as you said, scaling up the hydrogen market from niche to scale by bringing together demand and supply. And in order to do that, we really need to bridge at the moment still a cost gap between the higher cost of renewable or green hydrogen and the much lower cost of grey hydrogen or natural gas. In the EU at the moment, there's already consumption of roughly 10 million tons of grey hydrogen. So our expectation is that renewable hydrogen will initially displace grey hydrogen in many instances where it's already used, or in applications that new applications that can indirectly electrify with hydrogen, such as the steel sector or applications in the chemicals industry. So the reason why the European Commission is making this proposal for the Hydrogen Bank is that we really want to unlock investments in the whole hydrogen value chain and leverage private capital into these projects. And the main thing that is holding back private investment is not that we don't know that we will need hydrogen. We know that it is, for many sectors, the only viable pathway at this point to deep decarbonization. So we know that for sectors like steel or fertilizers or chemicals, heavy transport, etc., we will need hydrogen or some form of hydrogen-derived fuels in order to meet our 2050 goals. However, many of these sectors have very, very long asset lifetimes, very long investment lifetimes. So if we don't manage to get this going relatively soon, if you build a new steel plant, as an all-steel plant, a blast furnace, Now this thing lives for 50, 60 years. So we really have long lock-in effects. And that's why we're even considering bridging this cost gap, which is in a sense a subsidy. But we're very aware that you can't subsidize entire sectors forever. So the stated goal of this is to really see if the cost of this technology can come down significantly. But we will need to see it coming down significantly because public money will never be able to bridge the financing gap that we have for the amounts of hydrogen that we need for decarbonization in Europe. So really the goal is to leverage private capital into this market and to get technology costs down in order to be able to meet our 2050 decarbonization targets.
Thank you very much, Johanna. That was very clear. Rasmus, maybe I jump to you. So as a supplier, why is this bank important on your perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Anna, and thanks for the invitation as well to be here today. So the bank is important because it helps to cover exactly that cost gap, which Johanna mentioned. We need to fulfill those targets in REPowerEU, the 10+10 MT. We need to be able to deliver renewable hydrogen derivatives to those hard to electrify sectors that have no other apparent race to decarbonize. And we want to get going as a commercial actor. We are ready. We are already engaged in this and are investing and providing that private capital as well. But this bank can really help to ensure that we cover that cost gap. And if we get the design right, we really see this as something that could be a key enabler, bringing that last piece of the puzzle to be able to take FID on some large-scale renewable hydrogen producing facilities. So it is very important, and we are very supportive of the of this initiative by the Commission.
Thank you very much, Rasmus. Gert, on your side, why would this bank be important and what should be its focus?
Yes, thanks again for inviting TNE to participate. In the previous comments, there was already a reference to replacing grey hydrogen, chemical applications of or applications of green hydrogen in the chemical industry. And there was one very brief mention of transport or long distance transport, I think Johanna said. And we feel that in discussions on the hydrogen bank, that there is insufficient attention to the transport sector and then the hard to abate transport modes, aviation and shipping. So this is really an area where the cost gap between the fossil fuel, the heavy fuel oil for shipping is about 5 times cheaper than the green ammonia that would be used in the shipping sector. So there's a massive cost gap and that needs to come down. And this is where the hydrogen bank can play a role. I would also rename the hydrogen bank. It's not a bank and it shouldn't just be focused on hydrogen either. So if anything, it should be like hydrogen and e-fuel bank or anyway, there's better marketing people out there that can resolve this issue. But yeah, it's also about the e-fuels, about synthesizing the green hydrogen with other molecules. And last but not least, it needs to be a green hydrogen bank. The focus should be on RFMBOs, renewable fuels of non-biological origin, and we should not waste time and resources on blue hydrogen, given the problematic upstream methane emissions, the capture rates and so on, and it would also continue to lock us into fossil fuel dependency, imports of fossil gas and so on. So transport, e-fuels, and focus on green hydrogen. That will be my priorities for the hydrogen bank. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very clear. So now that we understand the importance of this bank, maybe we jump into understanding how the auctions would be designed. So Johanna, maybe back to you. So we hear that the first auction is to take place in autumn 2023. My question to you is, how will the money be allocated? We hear Gert talking about the need of targeting specific sectors. So will there be dedicated auctions for these sectors? For instance, aviation and shipping. What's your take?
Yes, thanks for that question. So maybe first I go a little bit more into the structure of the bank, because there's also an international and a domestic part to it. And at DG Klima, we're mostly working at the domestic part, so auctions within the EU for consumers or off-takers within the EU. But we know that we will also need hydrogen or hydrogen derivative imports in order to meet our industry decarbonization targets. And that is an important other part of the bank, to which I will go into less detail today. But there might be two different types of options that are suitable for each of these aspects. And the reason for that is that really hydrogen imports from abroad basically means project finance abroad. And the risks associated with that are very different with project finance in Europe, and also the ability to transport these fuels. So maybe different solutions will be found for these two different parts. But I can talk a little bit more about the domestic side of the hydrogen bank. So we are looking at fixed premium auctions. The idea here is very similar to auctions in the renewable sector, where you had CFDs or contracts for difference, and fixed premium auctions for a long time in order to support renewable electricity production, which by now has come down in cost to a level where it basically needs no support anymore in many areas. So the idea here is to have an auction on the supply side of the hydrogen producers, where project developers enter into an auction against each other, bidding sum in euros per kilogram of hydrogen for a fixed premium to be paid per volume verified and produced over a period of 10 years. And the lowest bidder wins the auction. So we rank the bids from lowest to highest and then clear the auction at the point where our innovation fund budget is exhausted, or the budget for that auction is exhausted. And the benefit of that is, as long as there is competition in the auction and the expectation of competition for all bidders, we can be assured that companies bid the real cost of production. Whereas for the regular grants at the moment under the Innovation Fund, we still really assess in depth with a lot of financial engineers and a lot of manpower every single project and dig into the projects. This is something that we hope to really streamline and make much less administratively heavy, also for the projects that apply, by having this market-based mechanism. Now, I'm saying it's an auction on the side of the producer, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't benefit the off-taker, because essentially the willingness to pay on the off-taker side is priced into the bid. So if I'm a hydrogen producer and we expect the producer to find an off-taker, if they find a better paying off-taker or an off-taker with a higher willingness to pay, then they can bid lower in the auction and they are more likely to win. So in that sense, it also really gives us an idea of different sectors' willingness to pay for the green hydrogen. And that's maybe also a point directed at Gert. We did a lot of market analysis to have an idea of how the first auctions might go. And actually the heavy transport sector is not doing that poorly in terms of willingness to pay, because the margins or the cost effect of the fuel on the final cost of transport, for example, in shipping, is very low, for example, compared to steel, which is also a market where the profit margins for the product are very low, and the costs can't be easily passed through to the final consumer. So I think we will also learn a lot about different sectors' price structures when we run this first auction. So this is a little bit how we intend to do the first auction. That said, it's really the first time we're doing this on the European level, and we're really learning by doing. So the first auction will also be an indicator of how much interest and how much competition there is, and where the bids come from and where the offtake comes from. So we will adjust this as we go along and as we learn from the experience of this first pilot auction at the end of this year.
Thank you very much for this very comprehensive overview, Johanna. Gert, maybe I will invite you to comment first on what we just heard from the Commission, and namely on this focus of specifically targeted sectors. So please, the floor is yours.
Yes, no, I hear Johanna about indeed the willingness to pay and the ability to pass on the fuel cost to the final consumer. I think particularly for shipping, I think the fuel cost is about 60% of the OPEX of like operating a ship. So I think there's a big issue in the short term for the cost competitiveness among different shipping companies. Also, bunkering is a major obstacle for shipping companies to take up these fuels. So I think this is really where the hydrogen bank and investments in e-fuels for shipping can really make a difference. So it will really address the sort of yeah, the small margins between the shipping companies and nobody wanting to be the first mover on this. So this is where these shipping, if we have a mandate on the off-takers in the shipping sector, then I think supply side CFDs can really make a difference for the shipping sector in order to get this started, to have some movement, to get some e-fuels going in this sector before 2030. I think that's really what's needed, and it's yeah, I think the bank can play a role with the supply side CFDs to make sure that the e-fuels are available for the shipping sector.
Thank you very much, Geert. Leon, I invite you to also comment on what we just heard and to give us your overview.
Thanks, Anna, and appreciate very much the invitation. Maybe just in one line. So for those that don't know, First Ammonia is a green ammonia pioneer that recently signed the world's largest offtake agreement for industrial scale solid oxide electrolyzers worth 5 gigawatts with the Danish producer Topsoe. In terms of the expansion in use cases for green ammonia, I definitely agree also with what was said about that there's a huge potential there for also decarbonizing the shipping sector. In the short run, we expect also the demand for green ammonia in Europe to come from also a lot from existing uses. So just to give you an idea, the current global market for ammonia, which is about 185 million tons per year, it's mostly coming from the fertilizer sector and from the chemical sector. So really these hard to electrify industries. So we expect there to be a lot of demand, and that's also why we think it's really important to have these targets for RFNBOs for industry and clearly link that to the Hydrogen Bank mandate and scope.
Thank you very much, Leon. Before we jump to our next question, I see we already have some questions from our audience. And the first one is to Johanna. So, does the Commission plan to only consider financial aspects or also others? For instance, the situation of workers in funded projects and sustainability criteria? Please feel free to answer. Thank you.
Yes, thanks a lot. Tricky question. Definitely, yes, we do consider these aspects, especially sustainability criteria. The first auction will be held for RFNBOs only. So by definition of the product that we're calling for in the auction, we're already going for a very strict definition of renewable hydrogen, which in the product definition puts a lot of constraints on what can be counted as fully renewable. At the same time, we're also very conscious of, for example, water scarcity in some areas. In terms of situation of workers, actually in our analysis, most of the jobs along the hydrogen value chain are created in electrolyzer manufacturing rather than the operation of an electrolyzer. So that's something we have in the back of our minds, but we don't see as a major point to include as an award criterion for the auction at this point.
Thank you very much, Johanna. So our next question is around the pre-qualification criteria of these auctions that we've been speaking about. So Rasmus, I go back to you. So how to best pre-qualify and award these projects?
Thank you, Anna, for that question. I think on a high level, what we should aim for here is quick implementation of the scheme, simplicity and ease in both submitting the bids and assessing from the Commission side of the incoming bids, and then also a certain level of pragmatism in the pre-qualification criteria. This is first now a pilot round coming up, and I think some key learnings will be had in the first couple of rounds in the bank. So to start off, in terms of simplicity and speed, Ørsted fully support the simplicity inherent in the suggestion already described by Johanna before, with a fixed price premium. It's a relatively easy pay as bid price only auction, which we think will help to implement the scheme quickly. And then comes the pre-qualification criteria, and that's really where some of the issues around simplicity is also inherent. We do believe that the bank should target mature projects where indeed the funding is one of those last pieces to the puzzle before taking FID, so that we can put the assets on the ground and start delivering these products as quickly as possible. And while also ensuring that the awarded winners have indeed their solid fundamentals in place. And some key levers to ensure that from our perspective is one, that a financial guarantee or financial guarantees are submitted together with the bid, likely in the form of bid or performance bonds and performance bonds. We also think the ideas around a memorandum of understanding with key off-takers in those hard to electrify sectors is also a key lever to ensure that indeed the producer has gotten into serious talks with concrete off-takers, discussed various aspects of volumes and price and delivery to justify that indeed we have a serious project here that is capable and able and willing to take FID when these funds are awarded. And then as well, we do see that certain documentation for the physical site is also a good way of substantiating good projects, so to speak. So that indeed you have secured a site or the land to base your assets on, and you have the physical opportunity to get your utilities, I mean, your water, your electricity connection, just as examples. And if your project rests on the assumption of, let's say, a hydrogen pipeline, then indeed you have substantiated that there will be such pipeline in place at the time of COD. That would be an example, and it could vary across projects. But those are some of the key features we see. And there is a balance here because we want to make it relatively strict so that it is indeed solid projects that will bid in, but not so strict that we limit competition, because that competitive pressure, which Johanna spoke about, is really important to make sure that there is an efficient award of funding here. And that's why, for example, for the memorandum of understanding, we see it as a non-legally binding, however, very concrete document, which is then put out as part of the tender material from the Commission side as a template, so that we can ensure that one MOU is similar in shape and size and form to another MOU submitted by another bidder. And then I think a final point on the pre-qualification is that's a point where we may differ from the side of the Commission, that we believe that accumulation of public funding should be available for bidders. And why is that? It's going back to the point about putting projects on the ground quickly. We have a lot of well-scrutinized good projects around Europe that have been awarded funding already, but due to their sheer size, due to the inflation we have now seen in power prices and materials and other equipment, they are still not able to take FID. And there we have the perspective that here the bank, with its relatively limited budget in the beginning at least, and also following, reflecting on the 3 billion euros, could really make a difference, could really be that defining factor that could be the missing piece to the puzzle. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rasmus, and we will get back to the point of the accumulation of funds a little bit later in the conversation. But before we jump to that, Leon, do you have anything to add to what Rasmus just said on this pre-qualification criteria, how this project should be awarded in your view? Please share it with us.
Yeah, no, very good points mentioned by Rasmus. I think, yeah, if I summarize it, really the pre-qualifications on the one hand should make sure that we don't, bid against any so-called ghost projects. And at the same time, we need to, of course, make the life of the European Commission as simple as possible by going for these pre-qualification criteria that, they can easily see, like a binary system, like a yes or no, do you have it or you don't have it? in terms of that, I think, we think that some pre-qualification criteria, I think it was already mentioned by Rasmus, but really having this site control document, which is quite widely used in the development community, simply means, that you have a right to basically lease a site. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to own the site, but that you have an agreement with the site owner that it cannot be given to others, for instance. Second thing, what we think is good to have is so-called front-end engineering design, or a FEED, which is conducted after the completion of the conceptual design or feasibility study. And usually these studies, they take place before the so-called engineering, procurement, and construction phase, or the EPC, to figure out, possible technical issues, estimate rough investment costs, etc. So those could also be two pre-qualification criteria.
Thank you very much to all of you for your responses very clearly. And let's maybe jump to the budget. So we've been hearing that the European Commission announced 3 billion euros out of the Innovation Fund for the Hydrogen Bank. And the first auction is to take place around autumn 2023 with allocated 800 million euros. So Leon, maybe we start with you this time. Is what the Commission is proposing, is it fit for purpose to make renewable hydrogen projects bankable in order for us to achieve EU objectives and also in view of the global competition?
Thanks for the question. I mean, if the budget would be a total budget over, 10 years, it seems on the low side. And let me explain why that is the case. You have now, of course, the US Inflation Reduction Act, which is really, impacting many investment decisions on green ammonia, green hydrogen are happening in international, boardrooms. And we see also that those decisions are more and more shifting to the US. So the EU needs to match the incentives given by the US IRA. And that can be a package of incentives. The reason why I say that it really needs to match it, if I look at it from our perspective, we produce ammonia, and ammonia is relatively cheap to transport over large distances. There's a recent study by the Institute of Energy Economics in Japan, which estimates that the transport cost of green ammonia is around $40 to $80 per metric ton. So that equates to about 4 to 8 cents per kilogram. So if the floor price is not approximately equal, or the package of what the EU offers is not approximately equal to the US IRA, it would just be more interesting to produce everything in the United States, for instance, and then transport it to Europe. And in fact, we actually already have talks with potential off-takers here in Europe who tell us that they, would be happy to buy the green ammonia that we would be producing in the US for their consumption in the EU. And the infrastructure is already in place for ammonia. You have 120 ammonia terminals in the world, 30 of them in Europe. So that would also be fine. I also mentioned, that there are many existing use cases and future use cases that can use ammonia directly as a fuel. So, without even having to crack it back. So these types of things make us think that, a floor price for the EU Hydrogen Bank would make sense, at least for the first few auctions, because it encourages also, bidders who spend a lot of time to have some certainty beforehand of what the lowest price would be. And what should then the floor price be? Of course, for the first few auctions, it could be equal to the US IRA tax credit. Of course, if a project has been given state aid or something else beforehand, then it needs less than the floor price. But having some sort of a floor price makes sense, at least for the first few auctions. Just to give you an idea of what that would mean for first ammonia. So we have this 100 megawatt plant in northern Germany, Wilhelmshaven, and that can produce per hour renewable hydrogen, so not ammonia, but renewable hydrogen of about 2.3 tons, so 2,300 kilos. So if we run that at around 5,500 hours per year, which means that we would be producing intermittently, so not when everyone else wants to use the green electricity, but if we were producing it for 5,500 hours per year, we would be ending up with an annual renewable hydrogen production of around 12.65 million kilos, and at a floor price of €3 per kilo, we estimate that basically means we need around 38 million euros per year from the hydrogen bank. So if the hydrogen bank's budget would be 3 billion per year, then 38 million doesn't really sound like a lot. On the other hand, if the total budget, so over the 10 years, is 3 billion, yeah, then it might be an issue. So I'll leave it at that. If there's anything unclear of that calculation, happy to clarify.
Thank you very much, Leon. Geert, I invite you. We would like to hear your views on the same question. So is what the Commission proposing fit for purpose to make these projects bankable? What is your take on that?
Yeah, I think one of the issues with this discussion is that we're also debating this in the back while negotiations are still ongoing on some key legislative files like the Renewable Energy Directive, and for the transport sector in particular, also the FuelEU Maritime, the ReFuelEU Aviation. So we don't know what the mandates will be for RFMBOs in those legislative files. And so, of course, if there's a mandate in place, that of course will secure an off-taker for these e-fuels in the future in the transport sector. So I think the hydrogen bank has a key role to play in if it becomes this kind of clearinghouse where it allows, against hopefully ambitious targets for use of e-fuels in aviation and shipping, to sort of match off-takers who have an obligation with the supply of green ammonia or other types of e-fuels. So I think this is the hydrogen bank that is sort of proposed, and I think this could be a very useful role, particularly if there's strong mandates in place for these fuels. I think again on the focus, there will be mandates, but I think in and of themselves, I don't think they will be sufficient, and the hydrogen bank can really play sort of this accelerating role in driving or pushing this supply of green e-fuels to the aviation and shipping sector in the period before 2030. So I think that's what I want to emphasize. Unless we get green ammonia uptake in the shipping sector before 2030, I think it will become very difficult to rapidly scale the take-up of e-fuels in the shipping sector after 2030 and be in time to fully decarbonize by 2050. So this is something where the hydrogen bank really can play this accelerating role. The same goes for e-kerosene in the aviation sector. There will be very likely a mandate. It will be hopefully set at the right level of ambition. But there is no e-kerosene industry yet in Europe. So to really facilitate, to really boost the industry, I think the hydrogen bank needs to play a role in this. So this is what I want to say about this sort of matching supply and demand, where hydrogen can play a role. The hydrogen bank can play a role before 2030. About the budget, I think, yeah, just to get looking at the numbers that we have as transport and environment, just getting an e-kerosene target of 100 million liters per year going, that will require somewhere like €500 million to get that going. So again, the hydrogen bank can really facilitate building up that industry in Europe and pushing that forward. The cost of running a ship 100% on RFMBOs, when we're talking a large container ship, that could cost tens of millions of euro per year. So again, in a pre-2030, with uncertainty about the level of the mandate, I think the hydrogen bank can really boost the demand for these e-fuels in transport and aviation and shipping in particular. So yeah, the budget is really a question, and again to Joanna, what would be available? Will there be sort of a dedicated pot of money for the transport sector and the hard to abate transport modes? That's still a question.
Thank you very much, Geert. We have another question from the audience on this budget topic. So this question is again to Johanna. So the author of the question says that we forecast a very big interest and that the pilot phase funds will not last very long compared to this big interest. So is there any possible pathway to scale the funds assigned so far?
Thanks. I see a lot of questions in one here, so I'm trying to address them like one after the other. Maybe first zooming out a little bit on this really large expectation towards this instrument. If we run the numbers, as you guys did just now live, we see how much money is needed. And I want to make perfectly clear that even if we wanted to spend all of the Innovation Fund money just on hydrogen, which is not the sole purpose of the fund, we would just cover a tiny, tiny gap of the investment need that's there. So I think this comparison with the IRA is only useful to a certain degree. And I think that takes us back a little bit to the ETS directive negotiations that have concluded before Christmas, where basically Europe has made a little bit of choice against a proper European solution with European funding for European project and more for directing a lot of ETS resources towards member states so that member states can spend that money on member state solutions. And that in essence is the big debate: to which degree can we have European funds that are spent on projects no matter where these projects are located versus German money for German projects, French money for French projects, etc. So I think there is a big constraint in how we are reacting to something like the IRA, just by the mere fact that the EU doesn't have fiscal policy levels, and a lot of the funding is actually spent by member states and not by the EU. So the role that we can have as something like the Innovation Fund is really to try to be the best accelerator possible and to get the largest leverage possible, because we won't be able to do a blanket coverage fiscal type instrument. And I think any comparison with that is simply not really taking into account the constraints that we have on the European level, but that doesn't mean that we can't work well with these constraints and do our best with these constraints. So on the budget, I will not be able to announce any future budget for the Hydrogen Bank at this point, precisely for the reasons we discussed before. This is really the first time we're doing this. And we heard from Leon and Rasmus when they were describing sort of the features of the pre-qualification, how sensitive the amount of projects that we can expect is actually to how mature we expect these projects to be. So the more mature we go, the lower the pipeline of projects that will be able to bid in this auction. So there's really a trade-off between how quick do we want the first projects online and how sure do we have to be that there's really enough competition in the first auction. So on the comment that was posted in the chat, I would love to see very big interest and a lot of applications for the first auction. But if we look at the pipeline and we really look at the maturity of the projects in the pipeline that are not just projects just on paper, but really already with land secured, with feasibility studies, with grid connection secured, with financing lined up, you're very quickly eating into that pipeline. And there's not 1,000 projects, there's not 100 projects, there's maybe a few dozen good projects. So that's really a trade-off that we want to get right, where we want to avoid speculative bidding, we want to avoid ghost projects, we want to avoid blocking Innovation Fund money for 4 years just to then see that the project is not building and not operating. But we also want to avoid having no competition in the first auction and the whole thing being a disaster and not being able to take it forward. So that's a balance to strike, and there we really rely on good information from the private sector. So I can already announce that we will have one last stakeholder consultation on May 16th, before which we will publish the full auction design with all terms and conditions for the EU domestic auction, so that stakeholders have time to go to their banks and talk about a bid bond or discuss this before they come to this workshop. And we really want to get the parameters right so that this auction works for actual project developers and is not just a concept on paper that we then let loose on the private sector. So that maybe has some comfort that we really try to make this a good fit for actual projects and not a theoretical construct. And then I had one last point. Oh yeah, on the sectoral targets, it's the same as with the budget. At this point, we are not announcing or planning sector-specific auctions. We will really see how the first auction goes and what the level of competition also from different offtake sectors is there. So that's the nice thing about this auction. It will create a lot of data. And that's actually also a main purpose of using a market-based instrument, that hopefully if this goes well, you can create a proper seed of a market where you have price discovery, you get price point from various projects, and these price points are comparable. And that links to the accumulation question, because if we have a lot of projects applying that have already received major OPEX or CAPEX funding for the electrolyzer producer themselves, these price points are no longer comparable. And it's also not a level playing field between projects from different member states in the EU. So given that there will be additional national measures and that our budget is limited, we would really like to use the European budget for proper European competition, rather than awarding projects that are able to bid low because their member state has been able to award a lot of funding before. And I think that's also a question of the sustainability of this instrument, because if round after round we just see Dutch, Danish, and German projects winning, this will not help in politically making this instrument robust in the medium term. So I think several reasons for this accumulation question. We plan not to allow accumulation for the project itself. That doesn't mean that the electrolyzer manufacturer can't have received state aid. That's fine. And likewise, on the offtake side, as long as not the same OPEX costs are subsidized twice, at the moment, our view is that that would be fine as well. What we want to avoid, though, is direct state aid to the hydrogen producer. That would really skew the playing field between bidders from different member states, because we all know different member states have different amount of fiscal space. And that's something where we would really like to keep European money for proper European competition.
Thank you, Johanna, for your answers. Very clear. So you already somehow responded to this question of accumulation within innovation funds and other state aids. Maybe Rasmus, what is your take here on this accumulation? Because you already touched upon this in the beginning of this webinar, but now I would like to give you the floor to elaborate a bit more on that.
Yes, thank you, Anna, and thank you for the points made, Johanna. I think a few points as well from my side to make. One is that what was mentioned about leveraging these money as much as possible is really also where we see accumulation as fulfilling that target, so to speak. Because right now, for some of that union and state aid already awarded, that sits idle at the moment because those projects cannot FID. That's where accumulation would indeed allow leveraging those funds as well. A second point I wanted to make is that indeed this concern about the level of competitive pressure and competition, you named a few dozen good projects. I think allowing accumulation would significantly increase that number. I have no data to back it with, but that would be my hypothesis, at least. And then I think that I fully get the consideration around geographical distribution within the union, but there I see, as you mentioned, we will learn a bit as we go from the first round, and if this materializes, and only some of the wealthier member states will attract all the funding, then indeed a regional sub-auctioning, so to speak, would probably be the right way to go, or could be one way to go, because we share that concern if it turns out that way. But going back to sort of the main point and objective of the bank now, which is speed and simplicity, we think getting those assets on the ground should probably weigh higher than getting market intel on price points, for example, which is, I heard, as one of the key arguments for not allowing accumulation. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you very much, Rasmus. I see we have another question from the audience, and the question is to Johanna, and it is on international dimension. So you already presented this focus on domestic dimension, but now the question from the audience is, will the EU Hydrogen Bank run in parallel of H2 Global? And how can non-EU nationals apply for this funding? Basically, how to ensure a level playing field with EU players. The floor is yours, Johanna.
Yes, thanks. On this one, I'm afraid I can't say very much at this point because discussions are still ongoing, mostly with DG ENA colleagues. They are in very close touch with H2 Global, and that's one consideration, to use a similar scheme like H2 Global or to build on some of the auctioning infrastructure there. But that will be announced in a communication to come. And likewise on how can non-EU nationals apply, I think that's really still totally out there. We're not there yet.
Thank you very much, Johanna. I don't see any more questions from the audience so far, so maybe we can have a wrap-up round. I'll give you a bit more time on this one to give your key recommendations to the European Commission. So, Leon, maybe we start with you, and then we go from there.
Thanks, Anna, and yeah, really appreciate Johanna and the rest for the really good insights. I learned also a lot today. I think maybe one key takeaway from our side is really, for these first auctions, as Johanna said, you want to understand, how everything will work out and collect data. So in order to get those auctions up and running as soon as possible, and also, it should be quick and simple. The US IRA also provides a very simple way to get clarity on closing your business case. So having the EU Hydrogen Bank as a fast answer means that it needs to be simple. Because if the EU waits until it basically has the perfect tool where it takes all these different considerations into account, then it might be too late to influence, the flow of investments going elsewhere. So I just want to leave with that point. And thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Leon. Gert, maybe a few recommendations on your side for the European Commission.
Yes, thank you. Well, just to repeat that I think making progress on decarbonizing aviation and shipping before 2030 is key to achieving the long-term goals. So I think this is something that a point that I want to keep hammering home. And for that to succeed, I think in the absence of very strong mandates in the various regulations and the Renewable Energy Directive, I think the Hydrogen Bank has a key role to play in making sure that these fuels become available for the sector and that the costs are declined. So unless we ramp up the production before 2030, there's not much hope of starting or rapidly ramping up production after 2030. So I think this is something that needs to be preloaded and needs to start now. And this is where the Hydrogen Bank can play a role. And then secondly, I would say we need a dedicated approach for the transport sector. I think there was reference of a floor price or maybe a reference point. I think again the reference point for transport is different than, for example, gray hydrogen use in industry. For shipping, it's heavy fuel oil. For aviation, it's jet fuel. So this is a different comparator that you at which point or that you compare it in terms of the cost competitiveness of these e-fuels. So I think a dedicated approach to the transport sector is worthwhile considering, particularly in the next decade. So those will be my two main recommendations. And well, just to repeat the last one, because we're at the Renewable Hydrogen Coalition, focus on the renewable hydrogen, given the limited amounts available. Clearly from Johanna's comments, I think green hydrogen and derived e-fuels should be the core focus of this hydrogen bank. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Gert. And Rasmus, your key takeaways for the Commission. Please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, I would like to reiterate the points about simplicity in the design and speed in the implementation. A few weeks back, when DG ENER hosted a workshop on the hydrogen bank, one of the panelists mentioned that most FIDs were indeed expected in the US in the coming years compared to an EU. And I think that's an important point to think about when designing the EU response to some of that US versus EU comparison of funding availability. And as we see the European Hydrogen Bank as one of those key EU mechanisms, I do indeed think that speed in getting these projects on the ground should weigh heavily and should weigh against some of those, exactly as Leon mentioned, finer details and getting it all right. So that would be my main takeaway: simplicity and speed. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your key recommendations. And now, Johanna, what are your key takeaways from our discussion, having heard all of these perspectives from industry, NGOs, and also the questions from our audience? Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thanks a lot. I've been taking notes duly on the recommendations. I can confirm from our side as well, speed and simplicity are really key, and that's a major driver behind a lot of the auction design as it looks at the moment. But we also want to ensure that it's really a good fit for the private sector. And there, because this market is so immature and so nascent yet, we also rely on good data from you. So any considerations that are really funded in data and experience of the maturity of projects out there, we're very happy to take that. We analyze all of that, and we rely on you telling us what works and what doesn't work, because features like, for example, the bid bonds or the completion bonds that we discussed earlier, I think they might be feasible for large companies or for projects with large mother companies, but it might present a major burden for SMEs or new market entrants like startups or smaller companies in the sector. So exactly these more detailed questions on, am I able to go to a bank and get a completion bond from my bank, or how long of a maximum realization period until I need to reach entry into operation is realistic, how long are the delivery times for electrolyzers at the moment. All of these data, we have good estimates, but you know best and the private sector knows best. So we really rely on your input, and we really appreciate the good engagement so far. And I hope we can come to a good conclusion on this full auction design in May that works for everyone and that will lead to a successful auction at the end of this year.
Thank you so much, Johanna, for your inputs and for being here as well. So thank you so much. These were the last words from this webinar on the EU Hydrogen Bank. We hope to hear an announcement soon on the Commission side. I would first of all thank you, all the panelists. We had a rich exchange on key aspects of this bank. Thank you very much for your availability. And of course, the audience for being here today and for all the questions for our panelists. We hope you really enjoyed it. A final note that this webinar was recorded and will be posted on Renewable Hydrogen Coalition YouTube channel. So stay tuned and speak to you soon. Wishing you a lovely afternoon. Goodbye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.